My name is Glenn Engelberg, and I am the Assistant Director of Recruitment for the GEMM, or Global Energy Management Program, with the CU Denver Business School. And we're very excited to go ahead and have you join us here today for the third part in our webcast series, The Evolution of Energy. And really the purpose of this webinar is to focus a lot more on the pressing issues, trends, and the important items that are going on in the utilities and power sector. So with that, the landscape of the power sector, as everyone knows, is undergoing a lot of transformational changes that are affecting the entire energy industry, regardless of where you're working in it. So to go ahead and help us navigate some of these developments, the most important trends going on, we have power and utility energy professionals, Brandon Blevins, as well as Keenan Austin, both who are GEMM alumni as well. And they're going to go ahead and discuss the outlook of the utility and power industry, including renewables as sources for electricity and generation, the job outlook, evolution of battery storage, and the impacts of tax equity, and more. Also, Keenan will share Xcel's goals for its renewable transition and the impact on Colorado and nationwide. Lastly, Brandon and Keenan will go ahead and discuss their experience as GEM students and how it helped equip them with the business tools at Energy Acumen to accelerate their energy careers. And we're excited to present, as I mentioned, part 3 of this energy series today. Before we get started with our main feature of the panelist session, I'd like to quickly review some important information on the GEM program just to make sure everyone has the same context of how everything works here. And then we will begin the panel here shortly. So first off, as you can see here, with it, the program is 100% energy focused. And we teach all energies from renewables, utilities, oil and gas. But unlike an MBA that's a little more broad, everything here is on like layers deep of how it works in the context of the energy field. Also, something that's critical to the program and its success are our faculty. It's taught by energy practitioners, most of which have at least 20 plus years of energy experience and are still working in the field. So you really get a lot more of the current and relevant issues of what's going on in the energy industry, and they incorporate that into the curriculum as well. Even with this as well too, actually, John Burkholder, who's one of our professors, or Michael Orlando, both have 30 plus years of experience in the energy field. We'll go ahead and work with the students here on a lot of those components, just to make sure everyone understands, really how does this work, with, as example, John Burkholder, who was the principal rate analyst at Xcel Energy, with, a situation that he encountered with the COO, or Dr. Orlando, who worked as the VP of the Fed's Denver branch, is now an economic advisor and principal consultant. How does this work with the energy case that he's working with? Just things like that. Lastly, as you may know, the blended curriculum delivery here is a hybrid online format that allows our students to continue to work while doing the program, because most of them are working full-time, and this allows our students to go ahead and continue to do so while still finishing the program here in only 18 months. And a couple points here too. The first is that we have over 400 students and alumni in the program, and we are having our 21st cohort start on July 12th here, which we're very excited for. We are still working with students for that class as well, in addition to our 22nd cohort in January. Our students, as you can see, come from all over. And one thing actually that wasn't on here too that I want to mention is our advisory council that's made up of professionals, and I should say executives, from NREL, Panasonic, Xcel Energy, the Canadian Consulate, and they meet quarterly to ensure the curriculum is relevant and the program is teaching the most important tools for leadership in the energy field. So that's really what our students are looking to do. For the classes here, really they're designed to give you the tools and skills to be an energy leader. They vary from finance, business, leadership, almost like an energy MBA, but a lot more in-depth on how it works in the energy field specifically. We even actually have a DC trip where students go to DC and London, and actually we had about 13 or 14 students that just got back from that yesterday, and they spend 3 days there learning about energy policy and visiting different nonprofits and think tanks as well. Lastly, before we introduce our two guests today, these are just a few examples of what some of our students have done, from associate VP to director of strategic planning, president, CEO, and some of our companies like NASA, Xcel Energy. We actually, I think, have about 15 or 16 students at Noble Energy, GE. So a lot of the leaders in the utility and power space as well are represented through over our 400 plus alumni and students in the program. All right, and without further ado, as you can see here, we have Keenan Austin and Brandon Blevins. Both are working in the utility and power space, and I'm going to have each of them briefly introduce themselves. And as I mentioned before we go ahead and do that, we have some prepared questions to help go ahead and guide the conversation today. And for those of you that may not have heard before, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, there's a little chat box you can write something into, and we'll try to go ahead and get to that at the end. First off, I'd like to go ahead and have each of our panelists say a couple quick words about themselves. We will start here actually with Keenan. So Keenan, do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, your name, your affiliation with GEM, and then we'll have Brandon introduce himself as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm Keenan Austin, and I'm currently a Senior Contracts Development Analyst with Xcel Energy. And so my role here is I support our commercial operations team in the terms of credit risk management and contract negotiation for commodity trading. So we have a small trade shop here at Xcel Energy and do proprietary trading, and that's my role. So I'll hand it back to you, Glenn.
All right, thank you, Keenan. I feel like we're like on a game show or something here with that. So, Brandon, if you'd like to go ahead and say a few words about yourself before we get into the first couple questions here, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. So my name is Brandon Blevins, and about 8 years ago, I was probably right where you are, wondering what I wanted to do to further myself in my career in the energy industry. And I found the GEM program in 2011, signed up for it with the whole goal of how do I move from being a specialist to being a leader in the industry. Right now, I am the general manager at GEMM7 LLC, and I have worked with utilities in the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and out West. I'm sure we'll get in it on a broad spectrum of topics, all of which are covered under this program. So happy and proud to be talking about this program as an alumni of GEM Cohort 7.
All right, representing Cohort 7, good man. So, all right, well, the first question actually, Brandon, will be for you here that we have. So, speaking of, your current role right now with GEM7, can you go ahead and discuss a little bit about how GEM7 came to be and its goal to help facilitate a smarter energy future?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's probably around 2014, I was graduating the GEM program itself. I was working at Southern California Edison, and we looked across with some of our other cohort members in oil and gas and law at other utilities working in the electric sector. We said, man, these projects we're doing, to look at this industry from the outside, if you're not part of it, you think it's an old industry, it's very monolithic, it's not moving. But with data, technology, communications, there's so much information and intelligence, and it's driving change behind the scenes. And we thought, well, with change comes opportunity. So we all got together and we formed an LLC to go after those opportunities because we realized exactly what we were doing in class is what companies wanted to see being done. How do they move from the utility of today to the utility of the future? And we've done business development, research and analysis. I'm currently here on site for one of our clients where they're trying to figure out aging infrastructure, tight budgets, where should you be making your investments? And it's just all part of a very exciting change in the energy industry. I wouldn't be on this path if I wasn't in that program. So that's GEM7 kind of in a nutshell, where we're at, how we got here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, Brandon. Yeah, and I think what's really interesting too, as well as he mentioned, was it's energy professionals from all different fields too, to go ahead and help make it. So yeah, this question actually is for Keenan. Here. So Keenan, being that you work for Xcel Energy, and I know they have some lofty and ambitious goals for being all renewable or close to by 2050, can you go ahead and talk a little bit about that, about the biggest trends with Xcel Energy and how that relates to their goals for being a primarily renewable entity in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the first utility there to announce their goal of being 100% clean energy, not renewable energy, but clean energy by 2050. So that incorporates several different sources like solar and wind and nuclear and hydro. So they've got a lot of initiatives going on right now to support that goal. One of those is Steel for Fuel, which is where they determined that the cost to build wind farms is actually offset by the fuel costs that they would have incurred to add the same amount of capacity through, say, a traditional natural gas power plant or a coal plant. So with that initiative, they're slated to be the first U.S. utility to surpass 10,000 megawatts of wind capacity on their system. And they've also been the #1 leading utility for wind generation for the past 12 plus years running. So big deal there. They also have a bunch of different solar programs going on right now. They've got their Renewable Connect program that is in Minnesota and Colorado, which adds solar resources to nearby communities. And these communities can opt into the program, and that increases the percentage of solar and justifies the building of these solar farms in those communities. So they've got a bunch of different other clean energy resources in their portfolio, as I mentioned. They still have their nuclear power plants, Monticello plants that they plan on renewing those licenses. And they've got some hydro here in Colorado and some biomass facilities. So, and that all, I think, represents, outside of wind and solar, represents about 20% of their portfolio currently. So.
No, absolutely. And sorry, I meant clean, not necessarily renewable, because one's like nuclear and other ones too don't fit under that bill. So excuse my language there. But no, I think that is really interesting, where I think a lot of people think, oh, maybe just, wind and solar, but to hear biomass, nuclear, hydro, how it's all being utilized there. And I know Xcel's been a leader, especially as you mentioned with on the wind side for a long time. So no, that's great. And actually, Brandon, this question here is for you. So since you do deal with a lot of that, well, I guess since utilities in general deal with all energy industries, can you discuss the importance of understanding the entire energy spectrum from like oil and gas to renewables to utility and power side? And kind of on the second part on that, why is it important for a program like GEM to help you prepare for the expertise in all those sectors for different job opportunities, kind of like you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, great question, Glenn. So as Keenan mentioned, there is a very great advantage to having a diverse portfolio. But when we think about the future, really understanding economics and what the cost of new energy is critical. And so to understand that, you need to understand where the supply chain, how things are sited, what the policies are, what the strategy for these other companies to make money is. We are in a capitalist America, and that's exactly how businesses are incentivized. But to give you two quick examples that contrast. So when I was in the GEM program, I was in California working on what we would call preferred resources projects. And think of renewables, solar, wind, etc. As more of those come online, you start seeing those as must-have. That fuel is available, you take it as a grid operator. When it goes away, you need something that acts quickly and is extremely responsive. Today, that's natural gas. That's the winner, is natural gas. And so understanding how natural gas plants are sited, how the fuel, what pipelines have to go through, you can really map out as a utility. If you need to be more flexible, understanding your brethren in the other industries is absolutely critical. And on a contrast, in the Southeast, where they're trying to have a diverse mix of nuclear, coal, or natural gas, and then renewables and hydro, they have older plants that are retiring, and they're thinking about what should they replace them with. And again, it's that exact same concept, which is you need to understand what you're going to replace it with. Today, natural gas is a winner in a lot of these cases. And so during the GEM program, I would say that my cohort was maybe a third of us were in the electric utility sector and 2/3 were in oil and gas. And we understood everything from the upstream side to the pipeline side to all the way downstream in refineries, and how this product, the challenges they faced. If I'm going to retire a plant, I can't simply say, oh, let's put a natural gas plant here. I have to think about what incentivizes them to better define my strategy. So the GEM program, our cohort, our professors, the advisory council, it's a really nice balance. It was what drew me to the program. And you walk away with a great appreciation that we're all providing a service to people. And if we work together, we can provide the best service that's safe, reliable, and affordable for us all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Actually, just to give the audience some context too as well, and I'll have Brandon touch on this in a second, is that with his cohort and other ones too, I know his was a few years ago, they all vary in terms of who's in oil and gas, the percentage of renewables, utilities, etc. I know when we first began, it was more oil and gas heavy. Now it has shifted a little more, where it's still very, pretty oil and gas and natural gas, maybe about 50 to 60% of our students, but also now having a lot more renewable utility and those as well. But having everyone work together, I think, is the biggest thing, because we see a lot of legislation or things going on where it's kind of one against each other instead of working together for a common goal, which I thought was really interesting. So actually, I guess on that note too, as well, Brandon, can you talk a little bit about like what the cohort weekend was like? Because obviously I know you had to meet and connect with all the students here, especially you coming from California, from out of state. So what's kind of the value of that, and how did that help with your learning? Just interacting with students from all different energy sectors and different areas.
Yeah, so I would fly in basically on a Thursday and then depart on a Tuesday to maximize my time while I was out there in Denver. And my employer knew that I was doing it, but the 4 days that you're on site are really irreplaceable, because you're there for one reason, and that is to improve your skills and try to advance yourself. And you realize that these 20 to 25 other folks that you're around are in that exact same mindset, that exact same boat. You're dealing with work issues, they're dealing with work issues, but together you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other in a very safe place. There's no penalty. If you mess up, your boss doesn't yell at you. And you start to develop relationships with folks in your industry that will follow outside of school. Clearly, my relationships in GEMM7 did that. But you're going to dinner with these folks, you're spending, all day in a classroom with them, working on school projects. And it's just a great way to understand their different perspectives to better yourself in your own career at your own place. Or we had several folks who were just trying to get into the industry, and they were trying to say, hey, I'm coming from this industry, trying to move to yours. What should I know? Where can I start? And the utility industry is a large industry, but it's also small. Everything's relationship based. And so you really drive those home over these cohort weekends, which I think was a difference maker in this program versus something that's strictly online.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good point. And just so everyone knows too, during the 18 months of the program, you come to Denver, Colorado every 3 months, like in July, October, January, from a Friday through Monday, which is what Brandon was just referring to. Keenan, don't worry, we did not forget about you. And I'd like to kind of shift the conversation a little bit to DER, or distributed energy resources, a little bit too. So I know there's a demand from customers, along with changing legislation and incentives from the government is pushing for this as well. That's affecting the utility sector. Can you go ahead and discuss the adjustment to the standard model for the electrical infrastructure and how Xcel Energy is dealing with these changes? And maybe just any kind of comments or general trends you see with that.
Yeah, for sure. There is definitely an increase in customer demand for distributed energy resources. For those of you who don't know, these would be electricity producing resources, such as rooftop solar, that are connected to our local distribution system. So, that demand is really prompted utilities and Xcel in particular to launch a lot of customer-focused initiatives that, the industry, it's changing so rapidly. And from, you have this traditional central one-way power flow system, and now you're getting into all these adding distributed energy resources, which it creates this two-way power flow. So that in turn really creates a lot of issues for the grid. The grid wasn't built for that kind of advancement. So to kind of deal with those problems, Xcel just introduced, I think recently, one of their programs was called AEGIS, which is the Advanced Grid Intelligence and Security program. Which was aimed at increasing technologies for grid visibility. Really, right now they're going through a solicitation for vendors to install on a mass scale smart meters for Colorado in particular. And then also just integrated transmission technologies they're developing. So, these advances are increasingly important as you continue to increase the technology that's available to all their customers. So, I mean, you're going to see a lot of new things coming out. You may be able to control your energy usage by your phone, by your apps. People are increasingly interested in home battery storage and, of course, their own generation like rooftop solar. So it's going to be increasingly important to increase those advanced technologies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think especially too, it's interesting when you mentioned the infrastructure of it and how it deals with storage, just kind of trying to change everything while still making new advancements too with certain systems in place. I think the key word almost is like transition, was saying, how it's constantly evolving. And actually with that too, Brandon, I wanted to get your opinion here on really grid energy storage. So can you discuss the concept of grid energy storage and what do you think the future of utility grids will be?
Yeah, when I started, it was called the Holy Grail, right, of energy storage. You could start to manage energy close to its point. So the way the grid operates today is often it's large centralized pieces of power, generally away from populations, flowing into populations via a network of lines. And what energy storage allows the utility to do is kind of begin to manage the demand and be more responsive to the demand, closer to the customer and closer to the load. And before recently, it wasn't really that cost effective for battery storage, which is the most common type of energy storage that you'll hear. Growing up, I lived about 3 hours away from Tennessee Valley Authority's Raccoon Mountain Pump Storage, which is 2,000 megawatts of hydropower that they pump onto a lake at night when energy's cheap, and then release it during the day when we all need it. And so that's how a market works. They don't want it at night, it's cheap, use the electricity, pump it up, and then make it during the day when it's more expensive. But we're starting to see energy storage be put in place as a non-wires alternative to the grid. So I know that in Arizona, and probably more familiar to me near my hometown where I was born and raised in Western North Carolina, Duke Energy is placing a 4 megawatt battery and a 2 megawatt solar plant at the very end of a long distribution line. And the reason they're doing that is they often have bad performance due to vegetation management issues, just an old grid, and they said it's cheaper to put battery plus solar on the end of that line and be responsive to outages than it is to just go ahead and rebuild the entire line. And I think that's the real exciting places for energy storage. And it's very useful when utilities happen to know where this is going, because they can start to strategically place these. And when you start to understand all the economics that go into when and where and how that can work, it's a really exciting future, maybe more distributed, but an exciting future with lots of opportunities to make that future happen.
No, absolutely. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear about those dynamics too as well, because there's just, as you mentioned, so much transition and evolution going on with that, but there's so much great potential for what that's going to look like too. So and actually just so the audience knows too, we got a question here specifically for Keenan about Xcel Energy's 100% to clean energy goal. Well, we're going to go ahead and get to that at the very end, but it's an interesting question, so I think we'll be going to talk about later. So Keenan, actually kind of I know we talked a little bit about natural gas as well, and how, as Brandon mentioned, right now it's kind of, I guess, the quote-unquote big winner, just with the availability, the scalability of it, and those kind of components. So I guess from just your perspective and with Xcel Energy, can you discuss the role of natural gas with utilities right now, and what do you think that will look like in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brandon really hit the nail on the head earlier, speaking to natural gas and its role with the utility industry. I mean, whether you like it or not, natural gas is going to continue to play, an integral part in every utility's energy portfolio. I mean, you're just not going to be able to have that type of reliability at your fingertips. So, and the technologies and efficiencies are improving, year over year. So you're seeing just vast improvements in those sorts of technologies. So, and it's just a reliable source of baseload generation for every utility. So, as you transition to 100% clean energy for Xcel, not all utilities have that goal at this moment, but it's probably going to be something that you're going to continue to see as a trend in the future. But you're going to need that reliability factor as you transition to all these intermittent sources of energy, such as solar and wind. That coupled with utility scale battery storage technologies, obviously those have a long way to go. They're not currently at a point where you could just completely negate natural gas, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen for a long time now. But to that note, it's just an example of Xcel's understanding of that necessity. They recently just purchased the Mankato Energy Center from Southern Power up in Minnesota, which was a 650 megawatt combined cycle natural gas facility. So, that just kind of shows you that it is an integral part of the portfolio mix. And you're going to see a lot of new technologies, especially with carbon capture and storage. That's CCS. That integrated with new power plants to try and, I guess the goal would be to create a plant that would be a net zero carbon producer from natural gas. But, obviously that technology isn't here yet, but I think there's some pilot projects out there and aimed at that goal. So.
No, absolutely. And actually, just to give the audience some perspective too, and if we have some time to Q&A, I think someone had a question about this as well, as far as just transitioning from one energy sector to another. Actually, Keenan used to work on the land side in oil and gas before going to Xcel Energy. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to all those different perspectives, that transition with it from both sides, which I think is really interesting. And another reason why in our program we try to teach all energy fields, because you never know where you'll end up, right? With that in terms of career-wise. So Brandon, kind of going back to you here, I know you mentioned your experience working in California and now working in Tennessee and the different energy climates there. How do you anticipate the future over the next about 10 years being for each of those states? And I guess what we think maybe Colorado can learn from that too.
Yeah, so they're very different energy and regulatory environments. So just to broad stroke the landscape in the Southeast, it's really easy. The utility owns the generation, the utility owns the transmission, and in some cases they own the distribution. So in the utility market, those are kind of the three big things. You either own large power plants, you own big lines to move big amounts of energy, or you own the wire that comes from the large bulk market right to our house. In California, that's not the case. Generation is competitive, transmission is becoming competitive, and distribution is owned by the utilities. And so I'll start with California, and I believe that California has always been a leader in trying to push and trying to innovate and trying to their view is to improve things. So they do that because they've always been an innovative economy. And so you see a lot of edicts coming out of there. They're going to be the first to push a certain amount of energy storage. They're going to be the first to do this amount of renewables. They're shooting for 100% renewables. They have a cap and trade market. So they have all these ways that they are trying to incentivize various decarbonation of the energy sector. In addition, they're pushing electric vehicles because they're trying to get gas vehicles off the road and push electric vehicles. At the same time, as Keenan mentioned, the grid was built not to really be that dynamic. So there is a tremendous amount of investment that has to go into the grid to make it a two-way grid, to make it the ability to talk across the grid. And on top of that, they're dealing currently with real risks related to aging infrastructure, like the wildfire risks that show up for the utilities. For those that don't follow this closely, PG&E was the first utility in several decades to file for bankruptcy in the U.S., and it's a big deal because they were found at fault on a wildfire. So California in 10 years is continuing to push the envelope. They've created and tested and probably paid a little bit to be the first mover in defining what that new energy economy looks like. But that's okay. That's what they like to do. Build it, patent it, ship it. In the Southeast, they like to kind of wait and see. You know, they're being pushed by the corporations that show up with requirements for 100% renewable energy. Apple, Facebook, Google, their data centers are located here. So they are pushing the utilities here to expand their renewable portfolio. At the same time, it doesn't mean that the Southeast utilities aren't moving towards a decarbonized economy. I believe I read somewhere that Tennessee Valley has reduced its carbon footprint 50 or 60% just by retiring coal plants and adopting natural gas plants. So in 10 years, you know, the Southeast will always be a little behind, but they will probably be pushing for what's the most balanced approach. How do they safely, reliably, affordably provide service for their customers? But I still see it as utilities are kind of making that broad strategy and what they would call vertical integration. And then in California, you know, it's the variety of ways they're told to do it. It's across the board. What could Colorado pick up from it? Colorado has always been a nice blend. You know, they have multiple states pushing multiple things. And so they get to kind of see and learn and test while also being balanced. The energy markets are fascinating to me. I'll probably stop there because I could spend 20 more minutes talking about the various dynamics.
No, that was actually really interesting. And actually, too, as well, just maybe for those that aren't as familiar with it, Brandon, before we go into a question here with Keenan, Brandon, can you talk a little bit about what exactly vertical integration is and how that relates to some of the details you were just discussing?
Absolutely. So in vertical integration would be that you own the company owns the generation, transmission, distribution, and the billing and services. They're not competitive. It's one company that does all of that. And they take that to a rate, probably a utility commission where they say, here's how much we think we need for rates to provide all of these services. And that's the number that you ultimately see on your bill. So that's regulated. Deregulated is they're buying the generation services. They might be renting the transmission services, and they own the distribution and billing that gets to you. All those rates are set in different rate cases by kind of an independent system operator or a regulatory commission. So just two different ways of controlling how power gets to the light switch when we turn it on. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And no, thank you for sharing that, because I think, we hear so many of those terms, horizontal integration, vertical, all that, so it's helping us to understand, I think, how that perspective works. Actually, Keenan, the question I was going to ask here, you've already touched on in terms of renewables and the main source new capacity addition. So actually, I'll take one of the questions from the audience here a little early that maybe you can touch on. Can you talk about what has made Xcel, I guess, their management and executive leadership so confident to make that statement, to go for that goal or target of 100% clean energy without, I don't want to say not without having a plan, but without having all the resources already in place for it? Or maybe they do. Can you discuss on that?
No, I think there's definitely some nervousness about, being able to attain that goal. But I think the comfort level comes from the reality that they could essentially get to 80% clean energy on their portfolio currently with the current technologies that we have in place. I think right now, natural gas represents around 23% of their portfolio, and coal still represents the majority as a single source fuel. And as they increasingly retire these coal facilities, they're replacing that generation with these renewable attributes. So, I think that comfort level, that shift is going to increase the percentage of natural gas that comes online, but also at simultaneously increasing renewables, and they would be able to be at 80% clean energy. So just to give you a little perspective, for their nuclear portfolio, I think represents currently around 13 to 15%. So, that has a big correlation there too as well. So.
Interesting. So I guess what do you know approximately what the other 85% would be if nuclear is about like 13 to 15%?
Right. So then you've got, wind and solar. I think wind currently represents around 20% of their generation, and solar a small percentage, but it increasing year over year. And then of course hydro and biomass included. So.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you. And actually, I have another question here for you as well. Since you have gotten a little more involved, I know with the GEM alumni base and taking on a leadership role there, can you discuss a little bit about your involvement with GEM as an alumni, and maybe a little bit about how this helped you with your current role at Xcel?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about the program personally. It really played an integral part in my career to begin with. I come from a background from the oil and gas industry, and I was in that industry for about 10 years. And, the cyclical nature of that industry really kind of pushed me to expand my knowledge in different sectors of the energy industry, which GEM really gives you that perspective. I mean, Brandon touched on it earlier. There's just so much value with the program, with every different sector of the energy industry coming into the program. I think in my cohort personally, we had people in solar and utilities and oil and gas, and and being able to understand that all of these resources are going to be necessary for our energy portfolio going forward, and working together as one community is really an important part of our future. So GEM really gives you that exposure, and I think it really facilitated and gave me the ability to switch industries. I mean, if you're in one sector and another sector is promising to you, or GEM really gives you the tools to be able to speak to those different industries. And so I can't say enough about the program. And as you mentioned, recently just took the president of the Alumni Association role. So you're going to see a lot more of me coming around. So we got a lot of initiatives going forward, a lot of different events, and hopefully I get to see a lot more new faces.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think Brandon mentioned this too, that the energy industry is very big, but very small, but especially the utility side. I know with it too, that touches on so many. So I know that's a huge part of it as well. So well, we actually do have a few questions from our audience that I want to get to here. Before we do that, though, there are a couple quick things that I would like to go ahead and share with everyone here in regards to the program, and just a couple things that are upcoming here as well. So before we get to those questions here, I want to just quickly touch on a couple things that are coming up here for the GEM program, and thank you again to Keenan and Brandon for some great insight, and I know they'll touch on a few more things here in a moment. Just quickly though, because I get a lot of questions about application process stuff. As I mentioned, we are working with students for our July class as well as our January one, and we'll probably be working with students for our July class to about June 30th or so. The reason we can do it kind of so quick is that we usually have students finish our files in about a couple weeks. I've had some doing about 3-4 days, depending on how ambitious you are, and we can turn it around usually about a week or so, because we've been doing this for a long time. So just for anyone who's interested in that, of course, you can reach out to me directly, but that's just kind of a quick overview of how those components work. And we have a couple upcoming events here as well. For those of you that are local or want to come to Denver, here on June 6th, we're going to have a happy hour at Roosevelt Bar. It's right across the street from the business school, here right downtown off 15th and Lawrence. And also, we also try to give everyone the chance to understand what is it like to be a student here, what are we learning as an energy hub and an energy resource center. So we actually, in our July cohort weekend coming up, give those that are interested the opportunity to sit in on a class. Those and the classes we have will be economics, leadership and decision making, technical aspects of energy science, and 21st century energy issues and realities. So if anyone is interested in that, email me directly, and I'll be happy to go over a couple of those details with you on what that looks like. And as you probably have my email there, and I'll follow up with everyone. There is my email and a number there, right there. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And as I mentioned, I work with all prospective students or anyone kind of just thinking about or interested in the program. But we actually have a couple more questions here from our audience, so I'd want to go ahead and get to that. The first one here actually is for Brandon that we have. So Brandon, I guess they want to know, I guess first, what energy sector did you work in before GEM, and I guess ultimately, why did you decide, coming from California, to choose this program versus a local one or just like an MBA?
Yeah, it's a great question. My career path looks something like I was at DOE providing technical assistance for measuring wind farms, and I rolled that into a technical assistance on policy for coordinating about 6 or 7 state governments, industry, environmental groups on just policy-related issues. Ended up going to California following my wife, who's going into medical school. Very smart decision on my part. And as I was moving, I said to myself, hey, I want to get on the utility side of this. I was in government, wanted to get on the utility side, and ended up at Southern California Edison when I was part of this program. But the reason I chose this program over any other one is I wanted the words global energy management associated with me. I love the energy industry. I think there's very few places you can work that impact millions of people, and utilities are one of them. I looked at the advisory council and I said, this curriculum is being set by the industry. They're saying exactly what they need and exactly what they want. It's an industry that's undergoing change, and there's a knowledge transfer, right? There was a big buildup in this industry in the 70s and 80s. And those folks and that expertise, they've got a well-earned retirement not too far in the future. And so I wanted to shorten my knowledge gap, and I thought I could get the skills associated with that here at the Global Energy Management in Colorado. When I was in California, I worked at a utility in policy and then in preferred resources. And then after I left here, I used this degree to parlay my way into emergency management and getting more operations experience. So again, a broad base, but how I did that was I used this program every time we had a topic. I went inside my company and I said, hey, I'm doing something on strategic management. What are we doing that is strategic? Hey, I'm doing something in accounting. Let me talk to the finance department. I used my class projects to apply to my company to try to improve myself. So I would promote that to anybody.
Oh, absolutely. That's interesting. I know that's something that I get a lot of questions on too as well in terms of the curriculum, is that, well, is it more oil and gas heavy, renewable, or utility? And we try to balance it, but more than anything else, it's what you make of it, especially with what Brandon was just referring to as well, where you can really go ahead and use like, hey, my company has actually talked about this the other day and we're working on a project for this. How can we go ahead and integrate this into, a case study I have to do or a larger project? And I know our professors are really flexible with that too, because the more it relates to actually what you're doing, the more it will make sense, right? I think that's kind of the big picture of it. And actually, Keenan, I know you talked about it a little bit, but I guess would you mind answering the same question in terms of, I guess actually from a local perspective here in Denver, Colorado, why did you decide to do this program versus other local MBAs or other energy management programs nearby?
Oh, for sure. I mean, much the same as Brandon's experience. I mean, I really knew that I wanted to be in the energy industry. I mean, everyone needs energy, right? So it's one thing that is going to be pervasive. So yeah, in the GEM program, it just really spoke to me as far as the diversity of all the different topics that were covered, and that it directly correlated to what I wanted to be in. And as you mentioned, being able to continue to work while you're in the program, and the hybrid format is just really, it just really helps with full-time working individuals. So, and as Brandon mentioned earlier, the 4-day in-person session is just really invaluable. You get to meet your cohort and really create a bond with them, and it's just one of the best parts of the program, actually. And just from personal experience, I've had several different companies that reach out to me, and that's one of the key highlights when they speak to me, is they're like, what really attracts us to you and your resume is this, having the GEM program on there. I mean, that they see my profile, and I get recruiters hitting me up for positions just solely based on the fact that I have the GEM program as part of my experience. So
no, absolutely. That's great to hear. And I think I remember you mentioned that the other day too. So yeah, it's always good to have more opportunities, right? With that, and have something I think kind of stands out with that as well. So actually, this the next question here actually is for you as well, Keenan. I know you touched on this a little bit, but they audience member want to know is specific to Colorado's utility and oil and gas industry. Since you have experience in both, do you see any concern in terms of what oil and gas will be looking like in like 10, 15 years from now, as far as not having as much job opportunities, or more of like just a shift to finding different ways to utilize it, like more natural gas or shale as opposed to strictly like oil?
Yeah, that's a great question. That kind of takes a real political turn there for a second. I mean, we've had a lot of volatility in our political landscape here in Colorado, a lot of different initiatives that have been out there. We had Proposition 112 last year. We had SB 181 this year, which, we're going through right now. So you're seeing a lot of changes with regard to regulation and how the oil and gas industry is going to play a role in the future. So I think it's at this point, it's becoming increasingly dependent upon the local communities and the governments there that are represented there. So really it comes down to it's a political conversation that, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the future. But, as we mentioned before, you can't deny that the fact that natural gas is going to be a part of our energy future going forward. So I think if legislators are smart, they'll understand that and realize the necessity that we have there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting point too, and actually a student has a question, or a prospective student here for both of you, in terms of just kind of your opinion overall with the energy landscape. So being that I know you have worked in the utility, the oil and gas side with everything, can you talk a little bit more about, like, during those cohort weekends, I want to know, how does everyone get along? Because, let's be honest, and I know this from personal experience going to a lot of different events and stuff, there can be very heated debates. But can you talk about how there's just almost like, I think one of you said a safe place, as the term to go ahead and really discuss those things? Like, how is that, I guess, foundation of respect set? And yeah, just kind of talking a little more about that collaboration. Well, Keenan, why don't you go first, if you don't mind? Yeah, sorry.
Not a problem. Yeah, I mean, I think that those conversations are imperative, to make progress. You have to have conflict, and you have to have these important conversations of how we get to where we need to be in the future, and and the understanding that each of our industries are a necessity, and how we can help each other grow and work together in the future. I mean, I think it's imperative, and GEM really provides a format for everyone to be able to have these discussions. And we're all professionals, so I don't think you can get into a conversation where there's not this understanding of where the other person's coming from, and really gain some perspective from that person. So no, absolutely. And that's a really good point there too. Yeah, we all are professionals with that here. So I think they all have people in the program and goals. They want to see the betterment of the energy industry as a whole for their kids, for the future. And there's kind of that imperative understanding. Brandon, I can say, actually, can you comment on that too, especially because with your involvement as the general manager for GEMM7, I know you mentioned you have energy professionals from all different sectors. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, what those conversations were like here, and how everyone was able to collaborate, but in a respected manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would echo everything that Keenan just said, and he said it earlier as well. We all are working professionals, or working towards being professionals in the energy industry from all sectors. And so what you quickly realize is that everyone, probably in their perspective, is trying to improve upon whatever they can control. And we all have high, probably when you get to a high level, there's definitely philosophical differences. But because you know someone, and because you have a relationship with someone, you can come to really value and understand more of the why. Why is it that you think that way? Or what experience do you have? And it reflects on you, because you might say, well, I'm talking, like I was talking to Keenan about cracking, I'm a utility guy, right? I can have whatever kind of opinion I want to have on it. But he works with it every day. And so I'm really interested and curious into how he's having to deal with this issue. That was very topical during my time. All the conversations are very civil. They can be heated and people can have their disagreements, but it's an agree to disagree. And on the cohort weekends, what's nice is that you often do have a lot of the alumni. I think I saw the stat, there's 400 alumni, which is great. There's one here in Chattanooga also. And so when you start getting perspectives from all over the industry, you're getting insights that you can't otherwise get just by reading an article online that's from that person. You get to learn why and how they have that view of their experience. And I think that it's all great. We're all professionals, and we all are working towards facilitating a smarter energy future at the end of the day. We're all trying to better ourselves in that industry and help guide that industry. And the reason that most people are in this program is to improve upon leading that industry. And so once you understand everyone's perspectives and that we're all trying to move that direction, it's really complementary to whatever your view may be. You now have a more holistic view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually that's an interesting point as we're going to wrap up here in a moment. But yeah, I think that the fact that everyone has a common goal, they're not accidentally in this program, it's because they really care about growing their career in the energy field, and a lot of its different components, regardless of where they're from regionally or what industry that they're working in. They have that in common, which I think enhances the learning experience, especially because probably at least 3/4 of our students are currently in the energy field, and those that aren't have usually a pretty strong background elsewhere that translates to it, like project management or finance or something like that. So, thank you again to both our panelists here, Keenan as well as Brandon. I think that we learned a lot of interesting perspectives from the Southeast to the Pacific coast to here in the beautiful Mountain West. And it'll be really interesting to see the different dynamics from any perspectives from the grid, storage, and the other scales of the utility sector of what that will look like. So with that, I will go ahead and have the broadcast in here. Thank you so much to everyone who attended here as well today too, and for your questions. You know, it's great and really helpful for us. And as I mentioned before, if you have any questions to follow up from this webcast, please email or call me directly. I'll at least send a follow-up email to everyone here too, and we should have a recording available in the near future as well that I'll send everyone, so you can pause and play that at your own leisure. Until then, everyone have a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.